Okay, welcome everybody. We are live here on the Space Water Podcast, exclusively here on YouTube. You guys can find me at the mysticalspiralstore.com and the mysticalspiral.com, and you can find my Space Water Podcast here every week right here on YouTube. And you can also find me on patreon.com/slash the mystical spiral. Of course, we got our amazing guest. This is the third Saturday in a row here at 1 p.m. We're having the great one and only Gary Wayne in our series. We'll probably have a couple of weeks off, but he'll be back on very soon, everybody. We got Gary on pretty much at least twice a month or at least once a month on our show because we really think it's pertinent to have Gary on as often as possible to explore these topics. And if you guys have not found out about Gary Wayne and you're just tuning to the show for the first time, you guys are in for a treat. Gary is calls himself a Christian contrarian. He's a best-selling author. Genesis 6 Conspiracy is the series of books. This is his second book in the series, and you could find him, of course, at Genesis6Conspiracy.com. He's been coming on my show for many years, and it's a pleasure to be here. Everybody, buckle up because we're going to be talking about the gates of the Nephilim, possible spots on the planet that maybe have been even hijacked by these bloodlines, knowing that they're places where magic happens, the places where certain things open up, portals open up to other worlds, other dimensions possibly, and where just places of high energy that bloodlines have been keeping track of and going to battle of, it seems, for many, many years. So, Gary, thank you for joining me on my Space Water podcast. It's a pleasure to be here today with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me back and happy to be here, of course, and very much looking forward to the conversation and pushing the outer envelopes of how people view this world and maybe having them gain a little bit more curiosity and to examine the world a little more closely and not being part of the subdued masses like they like us to be good little sheep and never question anything. If we do our jobs right, then we're going to create a lot of contrarians who are questioning everything in the world because most of the things that happen is, what they tell us is happening or what has happened or what will happen is very far from the truth.
I totally agree, Gary, and I appreciate you coming on and when you haven't been feeling that well. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. It's really it means a lot.
Well, it goes on. It's not like if you just sort of sit down and not do anything, and
Get
mope
worse.
about it. Yeah. So you might as well, as long as the mind is clear, doing these shows is good. Um, so hopefully my mind will be clear and I'll be able to remember the things I need to remember. And
I got your back. I'm here with you. I'm here with you. We're a good tag team. Yeah, I thought it was very important that we talk about these topics today, this topic, and explore it in several ways because I feel like some of these spots that are mentioned as spots of the Nephilim were actually spots that the Nephilim bloodlines took, right?
yep,
And that they were originally important to God's people.
yep.
And it seems that we're still going to war over these spots even today, right, as we speak. And one of the spots I think we should start off, though, we've mentioned many other times before, but I think we can explore it in new ways all the time. Is Gilgal Rephaim, or Astaroth
Yeah.
Quarnaim, I think is the original name.
Yeah, well, it's close to Ashtoreth Karnaim, the two-horned um,
Oh,
bull
Bashan, right?
goddess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, in Bashan. Yeah, so yeah, that's a very, very important area. Bashan is kind of a region that's around Mount Hermon, and the two capital cities of Bashan, particularly as recorded in the Ugaritic text as it relates to giants, would be Ashtaroth and Edrei, and Ashtaroth Karnaim is the two-horned um, mother goddess or bull goddess, as it's referring to as probably the religious center, and Edrei being the city where the king Og of the Ugarit and Rephaim of the Ugarit would have come from. So yeah, it's an interesting site for sure because you have a site that is translated as the wheel of the giants or the wheel of the spirits, depending on which designation out of Hebrew you're going to translate Rapha back to. But they're both connected and describing the same beings, whether they're a giant or a disembodied spirit of the giant, it's the same thing. So this is in sort of a concentric sort of circles. And it looks like a wheel, and the wheel is so important, whether it's the chariot wheel to the Indo-Aryans and the chariot as a weapon, the chariot of the gods, the celestial procession and the calendars on wheels, the 8 Sabbaths of the year that they have on the wheel. And a wheel is not only round and circular, but it was understood as a circuit. So Gilgal Raphaim would be part of a series of holy sites that they would do pilgrimages in a circuit, just as judges would have a circuit. Originally, they'd go around and set up in each of the towns in an area that was set out for them. And priests on both the polytheist side and the monotheist side would circulate in a circuit as well. So it's religiously sort of understood
Yeah.
as an interesting aspect for context, because wherever you have one important site, you're going to have others, and
Yeah.
it's going to be laid out in a pattern, and generally in a circuit, and also generally aligned to celestial, astronomical constellations or stars.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you too. Is that how much do you think it's connected to the actual wheel of the sun,
Well, it's all interconnected. In
opening a
this
doorway
is
from the sun to earth, right? And
Yeah. So whatever the knowledge is, as we get to know more of the knowledge of the universe, there's these wheels and cycles that are important to understand. So because polytheism is a knowledge cult, and gnosis means knowledge, as in the Gnostics, and all the mystical religions are a knowledge cult where you learn more as you move into adepthood and higher. They look at knowledge as part of two pillars to make them a god, the other one being immortality, but you have to have godlike, unlimited knowledge. And so to become a god, you're going to have access to this knowledge. And that's what the polytheist religions do, is they develop the knowledge
yeah,
and then they honor the gods that they say delivered them the knowledge.
yeah. Well, this seemed to be a spot very important in the Bible, and there's one verse I'd like to bring up because I think it's connected to the sun. It's like when Joshua basically stops
Yeah.
the sun,
Yeah.
right? And it's saying basically that he's going to return to Gilgal. So um
Yeah.
says then Joshua spoke to the Lord on the day when the Lord delivered the Amorite to the children of Israel and said, sun is in Gibeon, stop, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And then the sun stopped and the moon stood still until the nation had avenged itself on its enemies. Is this not written in the book of Yashar? This is like the Jewish
Yep.
in the Bible, right? And then the sun stood still in the middle of heaven. And then it goes on and it says, and Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp in Gilgal.
Yeah. So this Gilgal is not Gilgal Raphaim, but the
Okay.
meaning and the importance is significant. And so it's easily to conflate the two. And early on in my research, I had them kind of conflated too. But so two things there. First one is that
Well, this is
when
good.
God,
I'm glad I'm asking you this.
yeah,
This
it's
is
great
great.
stuff because it fits into probably where you want to go. So the first thing is understand that when God does a sign, it's outside the laws of the physical universe, like stopping the sun. It's indisputable. And people will have to say, well, it could never have happened because that's not possible. Well, God is above the laws of the universe as its creator. So his signs cannot be duplicated. That's the point of doing his signs, so that everybody knows he's the God Most High. It sort of makes sense when you think about it. So Gilgal is the campsite of Israel once they cross the Jordan River after defeating King Sihon and King Og of the Bashan region. And they gather a stone out of the Jordan River when it's dried up when they're crossing it to represent each of the 12 tribes. And then they're going to go to a holy site of the giants and the Canaanites and understand those kings that they're chasing down to Makkedah, as I recall, and in the cave that's located there, these are Rephaim kings that are fleeing. They deserted their armies in fear, and they're just trying to protect their own lives, and they're going to be hunted down. So what Israel does is they set up their base camp at this location, and they're going to arrange those 12 stones in a circle. So they're going to create their own wheel site, not as a polytheist site, but it is a sign to the giants in the land. We just tore down one of your holy religious sites, and we're putting ours on as a sign that we're going to take the land, and there's nothing that you can do about it because we have the God Most High with us. That's the monotheist side of it. So this is close to a site where you would be gathering the stones to make the stone quarries to make these sites with, right? And the sit and the palaces and the temples. And so that's also called Gilgal in there as well. But it's part of a circuit of in a circle throughout the Holy Land. So I'm not sure where they're all located, but just understanding the patterns is it would be connected into Gilgal Raphaim, which would be one of the most sort of holy sites that are in the covenant land from a polytheist giant perspective. And there's also legends that Og was buried at Gilgal Raphaim as well. So now
And
what's
there's all sorts of
interesting,
megalithic sites there, right? Like
yeah,
and stuff
it's
that's
there.
not normal for the indigenous people, like dolmens and things
Yeah,
like that.
there's over 100 dolmens or
Yeah.
portals at Gilgal Raphaim, just as there's a dolmen or a portal at Mount Hermon at the base. And Gilgal Raphaim is, at the bottom of Mount Hermon, um, in the Golan Heights, right? So it's very, very close. And so this is the gateway to Hades that Baal, chief god of the Baalim Council that rules from Mount Hermon, Mount Saphon in the Ugaritic text, also known biblically as Mount Sion, different word than Zion in Jerusalem in the Hebrew, Sinir, and Sirion. It's known in different languages by an S word, so a transliteration of Saphon or Sion. And so, and typically that, I won't go into the etymology of it, but just understand that Herman is a word that's a derivative of what happened that made the mountain infamous. So if you've heard of the oath Haram Anathema that the 200 fallen angels took at Mount Hermon to create the giants, you understand where the name comes from. So Haram is the source word for Herman, and Haram, and it can be spelled Cherem, Caram, Carem. There's variations. It means cursed and accursed. So this is where the accursed oath of Haram Anathema to carry it out to the end, no matter the consequences, was originally sworn, and maybe taken again after the flood if that was used to sort of recommit other angels to create giants after the flood. So yeah, it's a very, very important place, and it's part of an ancient circuit of sites that were throughout the covenant land. And so typically important sites have portal locations in polytheism, which we would know as the dolmens that you're talking about. And a dolmen is kind of shaped like a mini Stonehenge, one piece of it. So you can imagine Stonehenge where it has these two pillars with a capstone and they're lined in a circle all the way around. That would represent a portal in each one of those capped um, settings there. And so that would, I don't know how many there are there, but it would be a lot. And then again, you have Stonehenge that's aligned to, as people are discovering now, an unbelievable amount of astronomical relationships and alignments. And so this is a constant. This is how you know it's being done to the honored to the pantheon of the gods. But if we go from a Christian perspective to a standard MO for people, is what the fallen angels do is they counterfeit everything, and they like to turn everything for their own use. So, depending on how old you think that the world is, if you can imagine a world run by fallen angels, and before they rebel, that there was all loyal angels, and there would have been sites in the world that would have honored, however, whether it was with unmarked altars and things or whatever to honor the God Most High, it makes sense that the fallen angels would usurp those locations and convert them back. And then conversely, which is a really kind of a cycle thing again, which makes no sense to me. You have like early Christian churches going and taking over polytheist religious sites and setting up their great monasteries and things, and chapels and churches and cathedrals there. And so it just seems to be this repetitive thing that there's an importance that of this location that's been lost to history and not necessarily stopped at the time of the fallen angels who usurped those. There may have been a period before where it was a site that God had dictated as being sacred, just as his holy land is sacred, and Mount Hermon, which oversaw Eden, would have been sacred, and Mount Zion in Jerusalem was sacred, but for a different reason than Mount Hermon, although you have two similarly spelled names for two different mountains.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the church does this now with the hijacking spots, and even in Vatican Hill, I find,
Yeah.
and I think most people would find incredible with Vatican Hill, some of the things that have taken place are right on that spot where the Church of St. Peter is on
Well, it's
Vatican Hill.
it's an Etruscan site, which is the Proto-Romans, as you're very well aware of.
Yeah.
And this is the original Indo-Aryan giants that the descendants of Japheth are going to intermarry amongst. And it is the branch hill, so a sister location for the Sibylline prophecies of or then the Phrygian religious cult. And
Yeah.
Cybele, was a daughter of Zeus and Lamia. And this
Yeah.
is the hill, Vaticanus Hill, which is an Etruscan Sibylline prophecy hill. Palatine's the main center within the original city of Rome in the Seven Hills of Romulus and Remus, offspring of Ares, the god Mars.
Yeah.
But the Vatican is built on this ancient site.
Incredible. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible. And for it to even go further, Gary, to explain, I mean, I know you know, we've talked about it in the past before, but this is on a whole different platform. Me and Gary have done radio shows on Para X Radio Network, and then when I went on over the Truth Frequency Radio Network for years. So a lot of you guys haven't heard us talk about some of these topics before, but right on the spot where Gary's discussing some of the rites that they celebrated with the Sibyl, and Attis and the war pursuers of Attis, they would literally right at that spot where St. Peter's is, they would castrate themselves, they would throw their bloody sex organs on the altar, and they would run through the streets if they survived it, and and all the stuff that was going on, and they would afterwards becoming eunuch priests, they would dress in female attire
Yeah.
afterwards,
Yeah.
and if they survive the event. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Abs
it's pretty intense stuff. And this is the place where guys where they now congregate on Sundays and have church.
yeah. And even more bizarre, they celebrated just before the new year with the Pope attending a special celebration of a jubilee, which isn't biblically uh, numbered and talked about. So the 25th year in every century is obviously one is part of the jubilee celebrations within the church, as opposed to 50 that's in the Bible. But 25 is the number used in polytheism. And the first jubilee of every century is a very, very important one that, is we talked about in a past show that they're introducing the age of Lord Maitreya or the Dragon Messiah coming after 2025, according to Alice Bailey and the Gnostics. But what's really important, not only are they celebrating the Jubilee, they're opening some freaking gates of some sort and doing some sort of ritual that we have no idea
Yeah.
really what they're talking about, why they're doing it, or why there's a Jubilee that's not biblically talked about.
And isn't it interesting at the same time? And I know that a lot of this sounds like science fiction. How can it be related? But and we could be stretching when I'm saying this. But at the same time, right now we have a gate on the sun that's huge. Like it's almost 60 times the size of Earth, a hole on the sun. And maybe the sun is opening up to prepare Earth for some sort of light that's going to come over the planet.
Well, we have unexplained uh, catastrophes that are going to happen in the end time that could be very much associated with things that would come out of the sun.
Yeah, that could be like
So
the finger of God speaking
yeah,
right that way.
so yeah, so we don't know what's going to cause some of those catastrophes, but clearly, in the reign of Antichrist, that's going to be very problematic. So, and the MO for the catastrophes of the end time are the sorrows, which means you see those same catastrophes happening over and over. They just get stronger and and closer together over the fig tree generation, and particularly over the last 7 years, once the seals start to open, where you get
Yeah.
more destruction and death that comes with it.
See, I lean towards the sun because I feel like there is going to be some sort of destruction by fire, and it's going to come through the sunlight, and that's biblical lines up with that.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you about the Gilgal, if is and it's most likely, I guess, not related to actual Gilgal Rephaim, but probably, like you said, closely related in the area and leads into it. The other time they mention it in the Bible that I wrote down that I wanted to ask you about was in Kings with the translation of Elijah. And Elijah, they say basically at the beginning, right at the beginning of I think it's Kings 2, 1 through 15. Second Kings 2, 1 through 15. It says, and it came to pass the Lord carried up Elijah in the whirlwind, the chariot by fire, heaven in a whirlwind. And Elijah and Elisha went forth from Gilgal, and Elijah said to Elisha, sit and all that. So they're coming from Gilgal when he leaves in the chariot by fire.
Yeah. Gilgal is a very, very important location
So I found that very interesting.
in Israel. It's, where kings were crowned. Um, Very, very important part of monumental events being celebrated in the Old Testament, and including where Elijah is going. So again, whether or not God would be able to create his own portal wherever, but it's significant it would be done at that site that was
Yeah,
used to tell the giants,
right.
we're
I'm
going to
like, this
take
is a
this
guy that's
land
bringing.
from you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's bringing down fire from the sky. He's
Yeah.
eliminating people with fire
Yeah.
from the heavens. And when he goes up to heaven in a chariot of
Yeah.
fire, where does he leave from? He leaves from Gilgal,
Yes. And the further part of the context is Elijah is the one doing the battle against the Baalim offspring gods.
the
And
Canaanites. Yeah,
yeah, and they're priests, right? So, I mean, the context of what's going on is much greater than this odd thing is, why is God taking Elijah to heaven and he hasn't suffered the first death? But that's because he has a special commission for him, and he's going to be one of a select few that are going to come back in the end time. Whether or not he's one of the two witnesses, or he's just going to make the way for Jesus to come, or he's going to do that and be one of the seven shepherds in the second Exodus of the last 3.5 years, we don't know. But we know there's two witnesses, and we know Elijah is coming. So there's not very many candidates that are going to qualify, but the two witnesses suffer the first death at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And I think that Elijah's commission would not be finished yet. So I'm not sure he's one of the two witnesses, but I know he's coming to make the way for Jesus in the end time. And what's really kind of interesting as well is that Elijah is the one who brings fire down from heaven. Well, so does the false prophet, who is the counterfeit Elijah that makes the way for Antichrist. And he in the book of Revelations brings fire down from heaven to help deceive the people that he's the true Christ.
Wow. So when do you think that that's possible? The years that that's going to transpire. You think that 2025 is like the first entrance into those times?
Well, I think that's what the occult is thinking. I'm not convinced they're necessarily in control of the timetable, but they might have an idea of when it should be. But they've been trying to bring that rendezvous with destiny
Yeah.
for millennia. And so they'll move it up at any point in time and bring it sooner to try and show to followers of God that God isn't in control of everything, but there's an ordained time. So what we do know, there's a fig tree generation, and you have to know when the start of that generation is and how long the generation is. So typically the fig tree in Old Testament prophecy was referencing the southern kingdom of Judea, that when they come back to the land of the covenant, that would kick off the fig tree generation. And then you would have either 40 years, 70 years, or 120 years. Some people might include 80 years in there as well as one of those generations. So is it when they come back to the land or when they take Jerusalem? And is it the shorter version or the longer version? So, I mean, if it's 1967 using the latter date, because Jerusalem is an epicenter for end time prophecy, then we're beyond the 40 years. We're in the 70-year zone that if it's coming sooner, that would be in the 2030s to 40s for the last 7 years, or it could still be further off if it's 120 years. So I think we might be in that zone. And Jesus, he uses this fig tree because before he gives his prophecies and goes into the temple to say Jerusalem's going to be destroyed and the temple's going to be destroyed, he goes up and eats from a fig tree and then kills the fig tree and tells the disciples this fig tree no longer bears fruit. And of course, they're Jewish people, so they know who he's talking about. And they're quite concerned, which is why they ask him for the signs of the end of the time, which happens shortly after that. So it is important to understand all of this. And so, are we in the end time? I think we might be, but I would encourage people not to get ahead of events that have to take place and make sense, and try and sort of say that, well, hey, we could have rapture next week or we could have Armageddon within the year. Like, we're not there yet. We're still in the sorrows and the seals have not been opened yet. And I know people will point to things, well, we have earthquakes. Well, you have to understand when the seals are open, we have 25% destruction of the whole world and people. We have not had that happen yet. So
Yeah.
we're
And
getting the
what is it?
lighter versions. Yeah.
Revelation 9 is when the abyss is opened up, right?
Yeah, that's in the trumpet judgments, and there's
Yeah.
33% destruction. So you see the progression.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah, so we haven't even seen anything like that yet. I think it might be. I don't think we can put a certain time on it, but I think it quite could be a fire that comes over the planet that starts triggering volcanic eruptions and because if we did have a massive solar storm, it could literally trigger earthquakes and volcanism. It could blanket the sky and all sorts of things can lead to happening from that. So I think that it's quite possible that it could come very soon. I feel it within in myself. And what's interesting too, Gary, is like different spots on the planet people have been talking about. I know it sounds like sci-fi when we bring certain topics like this
Yeah.
up, but I recently had shared with you, I was born in the call, and I've had visions about things my whole life, and big just little dreams and things like that, just deep, intense dreams. And before I ever knew about the idea of giants possibly being in stasis, I was having certain dreams about this. And there's certain spots on the planet that people have rumored that there are giants still in some sort of stasis, waiting for these end times. Now, I'm not sure if it's actually in biblical and at all. I don't think I've ever found that in the Bible, but we've found a lot of Christian people talking about it in the past as well. And I know certain spots might have, like in the Himalayas, this might be true. I don't know. If you ever heard of the the expedition of a guy named Dr. Moldashev?
No.
Well, he had gone into the Himalayas with an expedition. I think it was in the 1990s, and supposedly they did find giants in a stasis, but in a cave in a room in the Himalayas where these massive pyramid structures were and all this stuff. But they couldn't enter into the room because the evil that was overcoming them, like they couldn't face it or whatever. But I don't know how true the story is, but it could be possible that there are giants beneath in the earth, beneath Malta, beneath all different places. How do you feel about that topic?
Well, we I would say somehow, some way we are going to feel the impact of the giants in the end time. And I get there in two different passages. One is nothing is new under the sun in Ecclesiastes 1, and what was will be again, and the understanding of this knowledge only brings grief and sorrow. So whatever happened in the past cycles, and sort of that cycle thing that we were talking about earlier. And so we had giants before the flood, we had giants after the flood. We also have the passage in Jesus' chronology for the end time. It's going to be like the days of Noah. And the days of Noah is the exact same words that's used in Genesis 9:25 to describe the days of Noah as being 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. So now you have the days of Noah where you have it's going to be like that. And it didn't say only examine the days before the flood of the days of Noah. It said it was going to be like the days of Noah. So giants were on both sides of the flood. We had angels as fallen gods ruling over us and walking amongst us before the flood with the parent gods. Those ones went to the pit prison, and then the offspring gods take over after the flood, like Baal, who creates the Rephaim in the Ugaritic text, and they disappear shortly after the flood as well. So and then you have other ones that would probably move up, but they're not walking amongst us in terms of interaction. There's something that's set in place. So it's going to be like that. And understanding the destruction by fire is also important because in Luke's account, not only does he say like the days of Noah, he says like the days of Lot as well, which is destruction by fire. So that's the transitional allegory that we're going to have this destruction by fire that comes from the skies again. So again, might be similar to what you were discussing earlier, or it might be a combination of that and our own weaponry and development of weaponry that would sort of add into that. So somehow, some way, we're going to see giants. So does that mean the descendants of the giants? And I make a good case that I think they're part of the visible hierarchy that still runs this world. But we have to be open to the fact that we could either ourselves create new giants scientifically in DNA manipulation, backwards engineering back to, let's say DNA that they might find of some of these giants somehow, some way, like in Jurassic Park. There could be that giants are going to be recreated by the fallen angels for the flood, or somehow, some way, giants survived the flood. And I leave a small crack open for that because it says in Genesis 6 and Genesis 7, God was only going to destroy everything he created. And he didn't create the giants. It's the fallen angels that did that. So how could fallen angels help giants survive? Well, you could do it on another ark, like in the Epic of Gilgamesh or Deucalion and Pyrrha in the Greek giant survival story. You could do it somehow on the ark. The last one I just said, I'm not much of a fan of, somehow on the ark. But if you have angelic help, like to build the ark, they could also do it in different ways. They could build stasis chambers, and they could do that in portal areas in another dimension, or in protected areas they could use the technology to protect them from. They could take them off the earth somewhere and put them in stasis, or in stasis in another dimension. So lots of ways angels have the capability to have done that. And we get legends and mythoses all around the world of giants in stasis, from in
Yeah.
mountains in Austria and Switzerland and and all around the world, and possibly Antarctica, as the rumors keep coming out of there that there's something going down on there and possible stasis chambers. So anywhere where it's cold and people haven't been inhabited, you could look for stasis chambers there.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying how they show up. I know the descendants are here, but I do expect somehow, some way that giants will show up in the way that they did before the flood and then again after the flood.
Yeah, and I don't rule out that there's some sort of, you know, almost perfect preservation that at the moment of death they were able to maybe preserve them like that so well, like beyond the later mummification that probably I feel like was a
Yeah.
crude version of what they saw.
Yeah. So if we look at technology today, and I think we're being helped with this technology, but that's just my speculation, just as it did in the days of Noah, both before and after the flood, we're seeing this digital technology arise, and it's starting to find ways to come together for this interdimensional angelic technology. And in recent years, we've been talked about the chip technology that's going to link everybody into that the people in Davos want to impose on the world. And you also have this medical bed that's being developed for that purpose, that it will be like a healing bed. Well, in the mythos and mythologies and legends, you have burial chambers for the giant kings, like sarcophagus. So the various sarcophagi that's out there is thought to be in some schools of thought in the occult, as they remind us of in their entertainment, which is based on their real history. It's just in a fictional story, as in a mythopoetic kind of style. Um, they have these chambers where they could maintain the physical body, so it wouldn't decay and could actually heal. As in the Stargate series, you would have the Goa'uld sort of going in that sarcophagus to do that. So there may be that technology that they had that we're just starting to see being developed in the digital medical beds that were akin to that. So if you have this at an angelic technology, why couldn't it maintain an oiketerion for a giant over the ages? But they'd still have to find a way to put that spirit back in there. But seemingly demonic spirits know how to enter the soul. So um, seemingly they would be able to do that from a disembodied spirits. But if they're maintaining these chambers, who are they doing it for? The ones that are wandering it or the ones that are going to come out of the pit prison? And
Yeah,
that's
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 another, yeah.
those are the worst of the ones. Ezekiel 32 talks about them as the terrible ones.
Yeah, well, I don't put it past that there's a reason why certain areas are snow covered and desolate now. And it's and what lies beneath and the Himalayas and especially like Mount Kailash is one of those areas where people just can't summit. People can't climb. And there's higher peaks that people climb. But Mount Kailash, people feel an ominous force when they start climbing it. And this is that area of the Himalayas into Tibet, Mount Kailash. It's called the city of the gods and the place where Shiva sits for a reason, right? And that place supposedly, Gary, has a magnetic force about it.
Yep.
And even NASA, I've talked about it when I did a podcast by myself a few days ago on my channel here. NASA's even discovered like these seven different lights that they can't understand truly where they come from, like plasma lights that appear around Mount Kailash. And it's interesting because even like you have the seven rivers of Indra, the seven all these seven colors that appear. So these light anomalies they say might have to do with the magnetic force of Mount Kailash. And Mount Kailash, I looked into it. Do you know that it's actually 6,666 kilometers from Mount Kailash to the North Pole, and it's double that. It's 13,332 kilometers from Mount Kailash to the South Pole. So
Yes.
that's really significant.
Yeah, the relationship there between the poles is very, very important.
Yep.
Yeah, and done to catch people of knowledge's or a certain level of knowledge attention. So to recognize that something did this on sort of on purpose. So yeah, it's very interesting. And then combine in that typically there's 7 to 8 holy mountains around the world. And so Mount Hermon is one of them, or the eighth. You could, you know, slot it in whichever way you want to do that. So where are the other mountains? Or is it all an allegory for one main mountain? But that I think there is a central mountain for sure. And then you have seven, which seven is a very important number, just as with the seven wandering stars or the seven gods of that are named in the days of the week, or the seven of the top seven that's in every pantheon, right? That people might be familiar with. So that's a constant number that is a counterfeit number used for the angelic hierarchy in heaven, and their hierarchy would be similar and a counterfeit thereof. So typically the top seven gods, the seven wandering stars represented by the planets, um, planetos in Greek, as for wandering stars, um, likely has an association with these seven mountains. And then Satan would be the eighth with his own sort of holy mountain, I think, if you wanted to sort of make the numbers jive with the monotheist version of the gods. So at a holy mountain, you have portals, as in Mount Hermon. So is it chambers within the physical realm, or is it a physical realm location to a portal to take you to another dimension that's occupying the same space? We don't know, but I think more of the interdimensional aspect, that those would be locations where you might portal into uh, Hades or Sheol, and that would
Yeah,
be seemingly to me the best location for um, these stasis chambers. But we get so many accounts that they're in the physical world all around the world, and even in North America, they say, as the mythos goes, that the U.S. military has giants in stasis and underground fortresses. So who
I know.
knows, right?
And people spew out so much stuff all the time too, so you never know. People, there's this stuff coming out of everywhere. And there is a story too that goes from Bulgaria. It goes back many, many years, and actually in 1989, when a lot of the democratic changes were happening in those areas, some of the stories came out from some of the expeditions that were taking place in Bulgaria, and they have caves in certain areas in the mountains. And this is places where that are really ancient, Gary. We've talked about the Thracians before, and Orpheus, the Orpheus mysteries, all come from those areas. And there's two spots, one called Stranya and another spot, what was the other spot called? Damn. It's Stranya is one of them, and there's another spot where one of them talks about uh a tomb of Bastet, that they have some sort of Egyptian goddess buried in a cave in stasis. And there was another one where they buried for a couple of years looking for some sort of alien technology. I got to look up the name of the place real quick, but
So while you're doing that, I'll just talk about Bastet a little bit, and you
yeah.
can look up the name. So if people are familiar with the Black Panther superhero, that's the god that the Black Panther honors. Bastet is the equivalent mother goddess to Tiamat. Um, and both create all sorts of creatures and giants and things that are maybe something we might see in the end time again. And these are parent gods, and they were very, very important. And they created, as one example, Tiamat creates, who's the equivalent mother goddess, creates the Gerda-Balu or their Krabamalu. These are scorpion gods to protect themselves from the offspring gods, who eventually, in their polytheism, overthrow the parent gods. That's the same description of these creatures that come out of the pit prison in Revelation 9 in the end time. So it's important to sort of understand that whatever these things are, they could be degraded watchers for all we know. and degraded cherubim, because they're kind of different than what seraphim would be degraded to. Seraphim are serpent-faced dragon angels. They seemingly are degraded to satyr gods or satyr gods, devil goat gods. And so this is a warrior type of god that seems to be accounted for by being created by a mother goddess, and they're on both sides of the flood. And they guarded the temples, they guarded the palaces, and the gateways to Hades or Sheol, where the pantheon of gods ruled from.
Like,
So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
an association with them, and they're coming up out of the pit prison in another dimension.
yeah.
And
Could it be even like one of these like ancient Asura tribe kings or queens? One of those, like one of the
yeah,
like sort of
yeah,
hybrid type human angel type being.
yeah,
And it's interesting because that other place in Bulgaria is called Sarachina. And if you look at the word Sarchina, it literally is like Asar or Asura and China. It's Tsarichina. So it's like if you really look at it, it's like Asar China.
yeah. And Mount Sion, as it's pronounced, uh, and as a version for Mount Hermon, it starts with a T and an S.
Wow. So that is like the Asuras right there.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
that's right. And Asar, that's incredible. And they translate Sarachina meaning like royal place or holy place, like
Yeah.
because it's the
Now,
royal stars, the Asars.
yeah. Now you're going to like this. You're so the Greek, the Hebrew word for a host of heaven, host and host meaning an army of angels, both loyal or disloyal, and different hierarchies for each with the rebellion. That's the Hebrew word sarah, Tsarah,
Wow, that's incredible.
sarah. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow, that's insane. Yeah, that's incredible. Well, so yeah, and and like I said before, we're at war at all of these special locations that we're talking about. Like Golan Heights, I think we've been fighting over in Golan Heights. There's been war going on since the 80s at least, too, in
yeah,
these times.
yeah. And for people who aren't aware of it, typically the Asuras were from the south and the Devas were from the north. The Asuras or the Amaritas typically are in polytheism the good fallen angels. Oh, and some
Yeah.
people would say good angels, but I would say good fallen angels. And the Devas are the evil ones, and they're in this dualistic war. Or
Yeah,
and just like
and
you
if
have
you're
white
on
hats and
the
black
Deva
hats.
side, the Deva's divine, and
Yes.
they're the Brahmas, they're the good guys.
Well, and Davis is the root word for deus, for God in Latin. And similarly, because and Deus or Davus in Indo-Aryan, which is Sanskrit. There's a east and a western of the Sanskrit and Indo-Aryan. So it you would expect a carryover and a similarity of words from ancient Sanskrit to Indo-Aryan that makes its way into the later languages, and it does.
Yeah, it's incredible, I consider all those Asura type and they're mixed. The Asura and Devas are all mixed together too. But like, I consider those all Asura tribes, like the
Yeah,
Persians, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, all of those.
yeah. Do you see any connection, just off the top of my head, the connection to Ahura and Hasura, or any etymological links there? Because I always thought they're so similar, as in like Ahura Mazda, right?
Yeah, that comes directly from the Persian. That comes directly from Vedic.
Yeah.
You know,
Would you associate Ahura with Asura, or are
yeah,
they
yeah, Asura.
nuanced and
Yeah,
different?
the Persians are. It's a sound shift.
Right. Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
it's a sound shift because when they're an Asura tribe,
Yeah.
and they're combating the Devas, right?
Okay.
And they're literally quoting all the Mitra and all the gods from Persian are coming right from Vedic, and they're literally stating that they're an Asura tribe in there.
Yeah.
And if you get the Persian Avesta, their holy writings,
Yeah.
they're clearly stating that they're an Asura tribe. It's a sound shift,
Yeah,
directly sound shift from that. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Well, and the
Even
other thing that
like
people
we
should know as they factor some of this stuff in, when we look at the word today, Iran or Iranian, that is a derivative of Aryan, and both the Sanskrit tribes and the dark-haired Persians were Aryans, Indo-Aryans, as of the same group. One's an eastern branch and one is a western branch. And so it's really important to understand that we have imprints that help us in our languages as to what happened, in the past.
Yeah, and when it's the Persians, they're when you look into for people to look up, when you look into their supreme deity, which is Ahura Mazda, this is basically goes right into it's basically them their interpretation of the Vedic Varuna. So Varuna is the greatest of all the Asuras
Yeah.
in the old time, like the older ones, and he's uh Varuna is associated with Mithra and and Mitra, and that's the sound shift from Mitra. And Varuna is the one of the supreme gods, and they actually, they have all sorts of equivalents to the Vedic gods that just take on different sound shift names. And like we've
Yeah.
talked about before, even the Egyptians, they have their Asura is Osiris, Asar, and
Yep.
he's the Asar Natar, right? And what's interesting is I think even mummification, and we're talking about being in stasis. I think this comes right from Vedic as well. And you have different places all over the planet too where we have mummies, but one of them was in the Vedas is King Nimi. King Nimi, they talk about as that he was preserved so well that he was like that he was alive. And I have this written down in my notes here, where it is in the Vedas actually about King Nimi. I think I have it here.
And also, as you're looking it up, the Mitanni were also considered the Western area from the Indus Valley. So the same people in that dynasties as you're moving further west. And the Mitanni were interacting with the Hittites and the Hurrians and other tribes. And in their
Oh
treaties,
yeah,
you mentioned the god Varuna. That would be one of the gods that would be mentioned as a witness to the treaties that were drafted between Hittites and Mitanni or Hurrians and Mitanni. And also gods were used as witnesses in those treaties were
yeah,
Indra and Mitra, as you
yeah.
talk about.
And
And
those. Go ahead. I'm
Mitra
sorry.
is Lord Maitreya, as we understand that, as the Gnostic and Theosophic coming dragon Messiah.
Yeah, dude. I'm so glad, Gary, that you mentioned that because those Matani, those I love those treaties. Getting into them because I found it really interesting because those treaties they're from like Hittite kings
Yeah,
and stuff, and they have almost like these chariot racing terms that are like pure, almost pure Sanskrit,
yeah,
almost pure Sanskrit, and they talk about Mitra, the Ashwins, Indra,
yeah,
Varuna. I mean, these are all Vedic gods and lower gods.
yeah. And
Like the Ashwins and all that.
what's interesting about the Hittites is that they have a different sort of color of skin and color of hair than the rest of the Canaanites, and their language is very close to Indo-Aryan languages or Sanskrit languages. And so for the secular scientists, they always thought the Bible was wrong because this had to be an Indo-Aryan group. But they're not. They just intermarried with these Western
Yeah,
area with the dark-haired giants in the north versus some of the other hair colors that we see populating the covenant land. And it starts to explain that how why they're honoring those same gods because they recognize them because they adopt the Indo-Aryan language as
yeah.
or religion as well.
Yeah, it's so incredible. And for everybody that wants to know, it's in the Vedic Puranas about King Nimi. So it's Vedic Puranas 4, 5.5.7. says the corpse of Nemi was preserved from decay by being embalmed with fragrant oils and resins, and it remained as entire as if it were immortal. And that's in the Vedic Puranas 4 5.7. Now, what's also interesting about all of that, that we're talking about the connection to Vedic, the Vedic man, the original man, I think we even get the term man from Manu. He was
Yep.
the original Vedic man. And if you look into,
Yep. And Manu was one of the seven sages.
yeah, one of the originals, and yeah, and one of the original seven sages. And when you look into Egypt, they have the western land of their setting sun where they bury their kings in Thebes is called the land of Manu, the mountain of Manu. And this is where they buried their solar kings. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's directly related to the solar kings of Vedic. And Nemi was one of the earliest kings of the Vedic solar kings, the Vedic solar dynasties. And he was embalmed and he was mummified. I mean, this is to me amazing that you see that being repeated later on in a more crude way in Egypt.
Yeah. So the interchange between Indo-Aryans of the East and the West was significant and under explained and under accounted for by secular or even religious historians. They just don't seem to want to recognize what's staring people into the face, staring them right in the face. And so people are saying, people will say, well, the lost language of the Philistines, we'd really like to have it. Well, the Philistines were dark-haired Aryans, right? Well, because originally they were a little bit different, but they intermarried with the dark-haired Aryans on Crete. Um, and these are the Cherithim, the Pelathim, Casualhim. These are all part of the Indo-Aryan group, and their language that the Philistines adopted, even though they're a Hamitic family originally from the human side of the hybrids, they took with them the same religion and same language of the giants. So when they went to the covenant land and you see them adopting and mixing in with the Baal religion, it's the same religion. And
Yeah,
Keret was part of the Baalim gods in the Ugaritic texts.
yeah,
And
and
Keret is who Crete was named after. And Keret is also the place where Zeus spent or Crete spent. And Crete also, as I understand it, no, I won't go there, but there's a relationship between Egypt and Crete in terms of the oversight of the Baalim Council. But Zeus spent a lot of time on Crete, and he's the one who begins the Cretogens of the giants, and he produces, Hercules. He produces Theseus and Perseus and many giants. So you have the people just look in the wrong directions because they don't want to look at the historical record when it doesn't fit their preconceived conclusion,
yep,
and they don't want to look at the biblical history if it doesn't fit their preconceived conclusion. So we get this contrived, manipulated, pretzel-like history that makes no sense with any of the records that we have, both in monotheism or polytheism coming out of history.
yeah, that's true. And people don't like to change, as the new information arises and they find out they don't like to change. I don't like that. But what's interesting too, we've talked about one of our great shows that we did was the language of the Nephilim. And I found that very interesting, and I think it ties into what we're talking about. I think there was some sort of ancient language, maybe a language of originally of angelic beings that is related to a Sanskrit type sound. Because if you look into Sanskrit and Vedic mysticism, they talk about the very language was developed as a language of the gods. It was developed to mimic the primal sounds of nature in the universe. Like the way they pronounce and do the mantras and the hymns was to align to the very sound of the cosmic forces. Like even that Aum and Om was said to be like the heartbeat of the sun. It's Shiva. It's the Om of Shiva, right? And
Yeah,
so,
and I think what we have to understand as we go to Sanskrit, which is again Proto-Indo-Aryan, just as all of the Indo-Aryan groups, which are giant groups, both before and after the flood. A, we don't know where that language comes from. Two, we don't know how it was pronounced. And There's so many
Yeah.
languages, even in the human languages, where it's how you do the pronunciation,
So
eh,
important.
that's so important. So now we look at languages that some of the demons speak, and they call it gibberish, right? Because it's fast and it's different sounds and we can't understand it, but yet it's probably Indo-Aryan and it's thought to be the language of the giants as well. So it's interesting that when you get into the Webster's dictionary, after the word giant is gibberish. And
So close to Gibberim too.
and yeah, and Gabor is the singular version of a description for the mighty ones. And I don't believe any of this is coincidence.
No way. No way. No way. Yeah, and yeah, I think that even there was some language that even the prophets of God in the Bible spoke. I mean, you have even we brought up Elijah. Elijah was able to rain down fire from the sky or from the heavens with just a single word. So he
Yep.
knew some sacred sound that
Yep.
was able to talk to God. There's various spots in the Bible where a single word or something triggers some cosmic event.
Yeah. A word for a command and dually the authority to be able to do that.
Yeah. So could it be even some sort of
So
frequency, some sound or frequency that emits?
it's a possibility. Certainly,
Yeah.
if you look at the Ark of the Covenant in conjunction with the trumpets and the fall of Jerusalem, and they took down other cities in a similar way. We don't get physically written that it's the Ark and the trumpets, but they're destroyed in the same manner as Jericho. You think there might be um, that's how they were able to topple those great fortresses and go in, right? So it sort of makes sense. So yeah, there could be a connection to a sound, and we ought not to again dismiss that from the biblical aspect to the counterfeiting aspect of it. So if you're in the occult religions, you have to have authority given to you by the pantheon of gods to do magic or whatever they're asking to do. And so they work with chants and they work with different um, harmonics and things like that in everything that they do. It's just part of it. So we would be, I think, too dismissive as monotheists if we didn't recognize wavelengths and sound waves and as part of additional knowledge and technology that can be used in various ways. I mean, it's just part of the physical world, right? So, yeah, I think it's connected, but there's always more than just saying a word. What backs that up?
Yeah, and shout out to the chat room. We got 128 people or so live. That's pretty good. Thank you everybody for joining. Another place that I wanted to bring up, Gary, we've briefly mentioned years back, was Mount Graham in Arizona.
Yeah.
Now, I guess certain agencies are going to say that it's because it's such a clear area and all of
Yeah.
that in that area, but I wanted to talk about a little bit about that area because it was significant to the Apache Indians as a place between heaven and earth,
Yep.
and it seems significant to many agencies have very high quality telescopes there. So, what have you found anything in your research that you'd like to discuss about that area, or what do you think is
Well,
possible?
it has a lot of UFO phenomena around it, but more importantly, it has a distinguished history, amongst the locals, right? And it is considered, uh, a large sacred mountain, and it's over 10,000 feet high. So it is thought to be a place of sacred burial sites. So is the sacred burial sites of the third and fourth class of the First Nations, or is this a burial site of the bloodline chiefs and the bloodline priests who take their genealogies back to their pantheon of gods? And originally, was that a burial site for giants that would have ruled? And is that one of the seven holy mountains around the world? I mean, we don't know, but you have this constant uh, that is inexplicable and unaccounted for of similar rituals done in the same way at mountains all around the world. So it's very likely that there may be a subset of mountains reporting to one of the major seven mountains, and it's sort of a hierarchy of this. And as an extension of that, on other holy sites, you would create not counterfeit, but images of mountains that would be a ziggurat or a pyramid to represent that mountain, but it would be dedicated to whatever the hierarchy and the gods are and the bloodlines. So I think there's a larger story here of our world history um, that goes back through polytheism, but I would not dismiss that somehow, some way, pyramids might be an even more ancient image that was originally used
I agree.
uh, in what the god and the loyal angels might have built or created, and depending on again, if you're not a fan of an older Earth, none of this sort of fits.
Yeah, even Tiwanaku, was it Bolivia
Yeah,
in the Andes Mountains? There's so many legends that go that also claim that area is a gate of the gods.
yeah,
That area, and I know like when people think of like Bigfoot and all those types of creatures, they think of the Himalayas or they think of the Pacific Northwest or something like that. But the Andes Mountain have these snow-like Yeti type creatures too
yep,
that protect the sacred mountain. And
yep,
they're these hairy beasts that are
yeah,
giants.
yeah. And you have a Bigfoot legacy that is on all continents around the world. Who knows what we'll find in Antarctica? That goes back to before and after the flood.
Your area
Eh,
of Canada too, right?
Oh yeah, Sasquatch is a big part of the Western Canadian First Nations history, and part of the after the settling of Western Canada. I mean, you have encounters not only with First Nations but also with the European settlers. So
When you were growing up as a young man, did you give that any thought?
Sasquatch,
Yeah.
yeah, it was um, very well known.
Yeah.
Nobody really knew what to make of it,
Did you believe
but
in it earlier in life, or did you start coming around when you got into the giants and the research of the Nephilim?
yeah, I started to sort of get more of a confirmation that this is likely real once I started to do more research and could find how would this creature be created and how does it fit into the larger sort of context. So again, if you go to like Pistis Sophia, a Gnostic gospel, in one of those chapters, it has this description of these watchers in the pit prison, and you have a face of a bear as one of the gods. And we don't know all the descriptions of the fallen angels. We know what a seraphim looks like, we know what an archangel looks like, but you have powers and dunamis and exousia and Icarus and other angels in the hierarchy that we have no idea what they look like. And so if you had a monkey god or an ape-looking god, as some versions around the world have gods in those pantheons, or a god that had a face of a bear, and it does what the seraphim do to create giants, and the giants originally looked more serpent-like as they're depicted before the flood and early after the flood, before they start to be diluted in their bloodlines, um, then you can imagine that maybe Sasquatch is sort of similar kind of being as giants, smaller, but intelligent. So they're associated with caves and with the elementals and with giants and with portals and with aliens. It's associated into the larger mythos. They're intelligent. They communicate. They have shining eyes. And they're unaccounted for, and we can't seem to find them proper, or they're just not telling us that they've captured some and they know exactly what they are. But they could very well be that greater sort of Nephilim concept, just as we have with the elementals as a classic example.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I don't want to keep you too long today because I know you're not feeling that well. So, do you have anything coming up that you wanna promote, or do you want to talk more about any more of the Gates of the Gods? Because we could go into it next time we come. Well, we've been over an hour already. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you're not feeling that great.
No, yeah, no, I think it's been a very, very good conversation. And I think that we should be very much aware that there are portals all around the world to the underworld, according to the polytheist accounts, and that we're just now being exposed to interdimensional technology and possible many dimensions. So this is becoming more real as things come along. And we know that the pit prison is going to be opened up in the end time. And there's going to be war in heaven. So there's travel and things going on interdimensionally in the end time. And we should be critically analyzing more what this technology is designed to do that's being developed and what the religious aspects as it starts to come to a nexus point from a religious point. What is the meaning that they're doing with that? Like with this opening of these secretive gates at the Vatican on a polytheist jubilee in this at the same time when it's supposed to be the age of Lord Maitreya of the Gnostics is coming together. So we we need to look a little deeper into these things, and we should not be just saying there's just Mount Hermon that's a holy mountain. As we see the universal religion come back, expect that there's going to be a coming together of this ancient history and how it was both before the flood and shortly after the flood. And I think those things will help us and guide us as to how we're going to make good decisions as to what we choose to believe and what we choose to do as this generation unfolds.
Yeah, well, very well said, Gary. Yeah, the one place that I was gonna bring up to you before, but I kind of got past it was a place called Dura Europos. Have you ever heard of that? It was a synagogue in North Syria in near North Syria.
Not familiar with it,
And
no.
then the the organization ISIS, they destroyed it in like 2011, but it was rediscovered, I think maybe in the 1960s. It had been buried for since like 200 AD. It had been buried
Wow.
between the something, I think, between the when the Romans they buried it or whatever. There was wars going on, but it depicts Moses in the Shekinah, like in the synagogue, but it
Yeah.
has Moses being taken out of the Nile River in from the ark by a naked Shekinah in the mural, which is totally out of crazy for a Jewish to depict a naked woman like that. So some people
Yep.
were saying it was the goddess Anahita, Aphrodite, and they were translating like the local Iranian legends sort of got absorbed into it. But it's a very interesting area, and I found it interesting also that they destroyed it. They made sure they destroyed it when it was rediscovered. And there's a lot of interesting murals in it. I'll send it to you privately.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that polytheism does do, it likes to draft in things about the Bible. And so obviously there's a supernatural aspect of Moses in all sorts of different ways, including being taken out of the water and into the royal family. Um, and the polytheists like to draft him. Well, that didn't happen, from the Western polytheists, and he is actually a son of Pharaoh. He's not a Hebrew, but you have a mystical aspect of Judaism that we have to account for that would be more akin to accepting and promoting these types of things. So, I mean, the Kabbalists and the Essenes were the polytheist version of Judaism. And so they were more than open to that. And also understand that, Cabal, Qbal, out of Hebrew, is where you get the word Kabbalism from. And it's the polytheist mystical aspect of Judaism, and it means to receive, as in knowledge.
Yeah. And it really didn't
And
really start coming out to like the 13th century or so, like most of it, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. So that's when it really, after the dispersion and enough separation, it seems to have gained more preeminence within the Judaic religious culture as opposed to the monotheist side. And this is akin to the Magi, right? This is akin to the priests of polytheism in terms of how they would have interpret things. And again, they don't tend to do things like dismiss Jesus as not being here. They just adapt them into their belief system. And they actually believe Judaism and the religion out of the Old Testament was usurped to become monotheist from the religion that Moses brought with him, which was the religion of Egypt that the Essenes are dedicated to, right? So, and the Kabbalism aspect sort of is the introduction in Babylon with their exile in Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. And that's why you have more of the Eastern mysticism that's part of Kabbalism versus the Egyptian Western mysticism in Essenes. But if you understand it's all the same polytheist pantheon, then it makes some sense and they become a little bit symbiotic as they start to work together as different sects. So I'm surprised we don't have more of these types of things about some of the patriarchs like Moses with a polytheist version of how it comes about. But again, if we look at the example of what happened, let's say in this account where the Muslims destroyed it because they thought it was a defamation of Moses, um, then we could have had lots of these things and they were destroyed by Israelites, they were destroyed by Christians and Muslims throughout the history. And there could have been a lot more of that synthesis back to that ancient polytheist religion that they're going to try and impose on the world in the end time.
yeah, yeah. Very interesting. Gary, can I ask you one more question before you
Sure.
go, since you brought up Nebuchadnezzar?
Yep.
There's one story in the Bible that I really like to ask you about, and it's one of the fascinating thing. I think it's in the book of Daniel,
Yep.
where the three youths are in the fiery furnace.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit to me about what you interpret this as? Because these are like, what, an angel comes into the fire and saves these three people,
Yeah.
and
And
King
and Dan
Nebuchadnezzar builds this big wall of gold or something, right?
yeah. So and Daniel is one of the ones in there.
Yeah.
And so fire was what was introduced by Nimrod to get rid of people who wouldn't convert to their religion, right? So this is that tradition that sort of comes down. And so Daniel is not, and his um, companions refuse to worship Nebuchadnezzar. So he gets thrown into the fire, but he's they're being protected because Daniel has a purpose. And so I'm not sure quite what the question is, but this is how Daniel sort of sets out kind of onto his commission, right?
Yeah, well, I'm saying basically like it because in this passage, like it's a roaring fire, like a real roaring fire, and then an
Yeah, it's an
angel.
imitation lake of fire.
Yeah. And then an angel comes down and saves him, right?
Yeah.
Is it like, basically I'm asking, like, is there specified like what angel this is, or what the other two people were saved for, and all
Um,
of this? Because there had to have
no,
been some real reason behind the three of the people, right? I mean,
yeah, certainly. I mean, we don't know what the rivalries and some of the motivations there. It doesn't seem to be coming from King Nebuchadnezzar at this point in time. Um, but it is certainly a challenge back to the priesthood of the Judeans who have just been taken into exile by the polytheist hegemony of the time. So yeah, it's one of those interesting showdowns, kind of like the Elijah one, right? And so it's kind of mysterious, but it certainly sets Daniel up for his commission and his prophecies and his interactions
yeah, we should do a future
within the
show on
exile.
Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should do a future show on him.
Yep.
Definitely. Well, Gary, it's been amazing having you on again. I really appreciate you guys. Everybody, Gary Wayne, Genesis6Conspiracy.com. Go pick up both books if you haven't already got them. You can even get signed copies. And Gary is a one of a kind guest, everybody. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate you coming on today.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks. Everybody, Genesis6Conspiracy.com. This is the Space Water Podcast, episode 51.